Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to get back into one of my favorite Image comic books of all time with East of West number 6. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in September of 2013, we of course see the very familiar cover layout that remains consistent throughout the entire run of this comic book. However, this cover features a brand new character that we're going to be learning more about once we get inside. Jonathan Hickman, writer. Nick Dragotta, artist. Frank Martin, colors. Russ Wooten, letters. The story begins at the tower in Armistice, and inside of the tower we see the High Priest Ezra, who is claiming that there is a traitor in their midst. He, of course, is standing in front of the 3 books, each one containing one part of the message, and also next to 2 distinctly Chinese urns that seem a little bit foreboding given what happened in the previous issue. Ezra then goes on to state that the message itself has been clear in determining that one of the keepers of the message is a betrayer. This immediately causes Bell Solomon to panic, as we have seen in the past that both he and Archibald Chamberlain are in fact conspiring against the message as they wish to prevent the end of the world. However, Chamberlain tells Solomon to calm down and immediately starts to rebut these accusations made by Ezra. He basically says that these accusations are a bunch of BS and then demands to see proof of these accusations. Ezra decides to humor Archibald and pulls out what he calls proof from the 2 Chinese urns, each urn containing a single hand, and these hands of course belong to Hu, the former representative of the PRA who was a member of the message, who we saw killed by her sister Zhao Lian. Now, of course, Chamberlain decides to keep up with his normal schmarmy attitude as he states, "Ah yes, 2 bloody hands. How could I have missed such definitive and undeniable logic?" However, as Ezra drops the hands and cleans his own, he states that this accusation comes not from him, but the message itself. However, at this time, John Freeman is also starting to become a little bit skeptical, as he asks Ezra, if the message can't tell us these things ahead of time, what good is it and what good are you? Though he is immediately rebuked by Antonia LaVey as she starts to question his own wisdom, stating that that's not the way the message works, and that despite the fact that she is the newest member of the Keepers of the Message, she is surprised that she's the only one who realizes this. She then states that the message contains different types of apocrypha, major and minor. The major being things that are called out by direct name, but the minor are the ones that are easier to miss, as they require an event to happen before they make themselves visible to the keepers of the message. This causes Bell Solomon, who is now calmed down, to start playing along with Archibald, as he asks then, "And that's what happened here?" Ezra then instructs LaVey to continue. LaVey explains that since becoming the leader of the PRA, Zhao Lian has rebuked all of their requests for an audience, and that she, in fact, is the one who sent the hands of her sister Hu to the Keepers of the Message, and that in her message, they can now see the message. Ezra then goes on to actually recite some passages from the message, stating, "The bloody right hand will hold the sword, and the bloody left the flower. From the chosen host, betrayal follows the dragon's fall." However, Chamberlain is still adamant that he's going to try and deny all of this from being the case, as he calls BS and asks Bell what he thinks. Solomon continues to play along as he states that Ezra is going to have to provide some sort of proof to all this, even asking if he expects Cheveo to just spirit it up. Chamberlain then asks, "What is going to happen now? Do you expect one of us to just confess?" However, Ezra then reveals that he has an ace up his sleeve, a gift from the horsemen themselves, as he opens a box, which he states contains a beast from the other side. He then informs everyone that the beast will one by one attach itself to them and feast upon their flesh, and in tasting their flesh, it will decipher where their loyalties truly lie. Realizing that the jig is up, Chamberlain decides to go for broke as he immediately turns on Bell Solomon and throws him under the bus. stating that Bel came to him with a plan to undermine the keepers of the message and tried to get him to go along with it. However, he states that he was basically able to refuse Bel's advances due to his superior intellect and devotion to the message. Of course, we all know this case to be the exact opposite, as he is the one who in fact devised the plan to undermine the keepers and got Bel to go along with him. Upon hearing this, Bel realizes that he's been betrayed and calls Chamberlain an SOB. As we see Ezra lift the beast out of the box and hold it above his head, Chamberlain turns to Bel and tells him that he best make like the wind and run. The other members, upon hearing this, decide to turn on Bel Solomon as they draw their weapons, and we see Freeman tell him that just thinking about it makes him too slow. He then draws his pistol on Bel and fires off a shot, catching him in the shoulder as Bel immediately tried to draw his own pistols and return fire. However, being shot caused his aim to be off, and instead his bullet hit Ezra in his hand, which causes Ezra's hand to explode. Ezra, of course, screams out in pain, and as he falls, he is immediately attended to by both Freeman and LaVey. Meanwhile, Archibald Chamberlain yells out to Solomon, telling him that he best run like the wind if he wants to survive. Solomon immediately bolts towards the door as he leaves a trail of blood behind him, while Cheveo jumps into action, dropping a bit of dust which turns into a large cloud of smoke that begins to pursue Bel Solomon. Solomon then uses his watch to activate his ship as he turns to fire upon the cloud of smoke. Unfortunately for him, his shots are largely ineffective as the cloud of smoke begins to transform into a large, monstrous creature very reminiscent of the Demogorgon from Stranger Things, as it opens up its head to try and swallow Solomon as he fires upon the creature, desperately trying to escape. Now, I would like to point out that while this creature does in fact really resemble the Demogorgon from Stranger Things, they did not copy this from Stranger Things. As I've already stated, this book came out in 2013, while Stranger Things did not begin until 2016. Then Bel jumps through a plate glass window as he falls towards his waiting ship. Unfortunately for him, as he falls, the creature shoves its head out of the window and uses one of its tendrils to grab him around the neck. Bel, as he begins to choke, thinks quickly and uses his gun to blast the tendril in half, allowing him to continue his freefall and land in his ship, completing his dramatic escape. As he flies to safety, though, we see a conversation happen between Cheveo and Chamberlain, as Cheveo, not so subtly, starts to accuse Chamberlain, saying, it's interesting that you didn't try to prevent him from escaping. However, Chamberlain responds by stating, well, I was unarmed, as we are all supposed to be. However, I was thankfully the recipient of y'all's dependable duplicity. Cheveo, understanding the accusation that's being made against him, states then, well, so you agree then, none of us can be trusted. And to this, Chamberlain makes an interesting veiled threat of his own. He states, no, everyone but me. You see, I'm no rat. I'm the snake who catches the rat, and you'd best do well to remember that thing. So it's kind of becoming rather obvious that none of the members of the Chosen have any trust for one another, despite the fact that they're all supposed to be working together to ensure that the end of the world comes to pass. We then, of course, reach the full white page with a bit of text that says, the old magic stays with you forever. If you have been marked, there is no erasing that stain. And just in case you forgot, they absolutely didn't, as we reach the 2-page splash of the East of West header that happens in every issue. This, of course, is completely unnecessary, but I actually really like it and feel like it adds a very unique touch to each individual issue, making this story feel rather grandiose, which is important because it kind of is. We then get to another full white page which says, all lies die in the desert. Back to the story, we see a small robotic dog wandering through the desert at night as it seems to be searching for something. Eventually, the dog comes across a downed ship and cuts its way through the hull. As the piece of the hull falls away, we find out this is in fact the ship of Bel Solomon, as Solomon inside states to the dog, I'm injured and I need to see him. We are then shown several events that happened in the past. The first event being that of a lone Texas Ranger who drives towards the smoldering rubble of his home. As he breaks his way into the structure, he is completely disheartened when he sees that his wife and his entire family have been murdered in cold blood, as we see him fall to the ground holding his wife in complete terror and agony. During this, we are given an exposition that explains in those days there was a saying, the only thing more corrupt than a politician was a judge. However, it goes on to explain that this was not because the politicians were of a greater moral standing than the judges, as both groups were totally corrupt and both groups were absolutely for sale. The only difference between the two was that the judges were cheaper, and who doesn't love a bargain? We are then teleported into a Republic of Texas courtroom where we see this written along the wall: to do justice and to love mercy. One such judge is presiding over this murder trial as he dismisses the jury, stating that under Texas law, he is able to rule upon this case himself as so long as the prosecution fails to make their case. However, during this time, we see that Bell Solomon is in fact the prosecutor of this case as he speaks out in objection. The judge tells him that his objections have been duly noted and overruled and that he's out of time. However, Bell remains defiant and says, "I still object." The judge then asks Bell if he has any grounds to support this objection. Bell states that he does, and then goes on to explain that the defendant, Mr. Philip Hollingsworth, was apprehended by the exact same ranger whose family was massacred, and that during this apprehension, he was covered in the blood of all of the victims and in possession of several of the murder weapons used in this dastardly deed. He then explains that the Hollingsworth family is obscenely wealthy and that they use their money to purchase the best defense that money could buy, and that the prosecution does not begrudge him for doing so as it is his right. However, Bell goes on to then state that what is not right is that the judge keeps implying that they have not made a case against Mr. Hollingsworth, even though they very much have. He then goes on to explain to both the judge and everyone in the courtroom that he would be remiss if he did not point out that the Hollingsworth family basically single-handedly funded the entire re-election campaign of this judge, and that this is a complete conflict of interest, and that the prosecution has multiple times asked that the judge recuse himself from this case based on this conflict of interest, and is now asking once again that he do so. The judge states that he understands, and that once again, Bell Solomon is overruled. He then asks if anyone else in the courtroom has any objections before he issues his ruling, when suddenly a person from the back of the courtroom says one word: mercy. This catches both the judge and everyone else in the courtroom completely off guard as the judge asks, "What did you say?" We then see that the person who exclaimed mercy was none other than the ranger whose family was slain, as he starts to march forward towards the judge. The judge seems to not understand what's happening as the ranger says, "I want mercy. I want mercy for my dead wife, my dead children, mercy from the corrupt so I can sleep at night, mercy for what's left of my soul." He then screams out mercy at the top of his lungs. The judge then screams out for the guards to restrain this man and remove him from the courtroom. But as they begin to do so, the man screams out, "Mercy, mercy, you bastard, please mercy." At this point, the judge slams his gavel down and demands order in his courtroom as he issues his judgment of a not guilty verdict. He then looks down at Mr. Hollingsworth and tells him that his business with the court is finished. Upon hearing this, the ranger decides that he has only one option left as he looks towards one of the pistols carried by the guards. Also, I really like the idea that the robot dog can be worn as a backpack by the ranger. I thought that was just like a really neat little idea and a cool way of the dog being able to accompany the ranger in places where it wouldn't be okay for it to just be walking around. That's actually really cool. The ranger grabs one of the guards' pistols and uses the pistol to blast the kneecaps off of both of the guards trying to remove him from the courtroom. He then takes aim at the judge and tells the judge, "If you have no mercy, then I only ask for justice." as he pulls the trigger and kills the judge. We then see the judge's body fall to the ground as the ranger simply once again says, "Justice." He then continues to walk towards the front of the courtroom past a very terrified Philip Hollingsworth and pulls the mask off of the judge, putting it on his own head. He then asks Mr. Hollingsworth, "What good is your money now?" Hollingsworth desperately tries to plead with the ranger as he asks him, "Didn't you hear the judge? Not guilty. I'm free to go." However, the ranger responds by telling him, "You say that like it's supposed to matter," as he takes aim at Mr. Hollingsworth's head and pulls the trigger. We then get a full-page splash of not only the ranger from the courtroom, but also two other rangers who are also donning masks from what I can assume are other judges. This is because after the events of that day, the rangers decided to declare themselves the ultimate law of the land because the system had become too corrupt. They then took it upon themselves to hunt down every single corrupt leader they could find and issue their final judgment of execution upon them. They did so because they believed this was the only way that they could save the Texas Republic. We then get to another white page where it says, "When the Rangers had finished with the judges, they turned to the politicians. No thieves, no liars, and no whores were left alive. Amen." We then find ourselves back in the present, in the home of the very same ranger that we saw in these flashback sequences. The ranger tries to remove the tendril from around Bell's neck as Bell desperately pleads with the ranger to help him in his cause. He tells the ranger that everything he's told him, while it sounds fantastic, is absolutely true, and that the forces behind it are very real, which is why he came here, because this ranger is the best he's ever seen. He then tells the ranger that he wouldn't have come here unless it was absolutely necessary, as the ranger has earned a few quiet years in the latter part of his life. The ranger then asks Bell, "Then why are you making such a noise? You're telling me that these chosen have to be stopped, but one of them is the president of the Union and the other a crown prince of the kingdom." Bell, however, tells him yes, they have to be stopped at any cost. However, the ranger then, as he throws the tendril into the fire, asks, "Then you want justice to be done? Is that it, Bell?" Bell then tells him, "Yes. You see, the problem is they're trying to bring about the end of the world. They're all evil, and I want justice without mercy." However, at this point, the ranger goes on to say something very intriguing. He says that the rangers all retired and hung up their stars because they realized that their mission was over, and that if they continued to go any further, they would end up becoming that which they had fought against, that which they hate. That they had to allow Texas to become its own new government within the Republic, and that they couldn't be part of it. He then tells Bell that what happens is, if you keep on going with the star on your chest, you start to lose the ability to see people. You see only the deeds they've done. You see only the crimes they've committed, and eventually you start to believe that everyone is evil and that everyone is corrupt, and that eventually you can't shake this anymore as it starts to take over your psyche and you can only see deeds instead of people. He then tells Bell, "You realize what I'm getting at, don't you? I'm seeing past what you're telling me, and if you know all of this information, it doesn't mean that you know about the chosen, it means that you're one of the chosen. What exactly happened, Bell? What went wrong? What led you down this path?" Bell then goes on to tell him that you tell yourself that you're not going to make any compromises, that you're going to manipulate these people to try and prevent them from ultimately achieving their goals, and that if you do have to compromise, it's for the greatest good. So you try your best not to, but eventually you do. You make a compromise. You go against that which you know is right. And you know what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. So you compromise again, and you keep doing it over and over again until finally something does happen and it costs you. But the cost is insignificant, you tell yourself, because it's for the greater good. So you keep compromising over and over again for years and years until finally you lose yourself. He then tells the ranger that while he has lost himself, it doesn't change the fact that the chosen have to be stopped, and that he can only do this if the ranger agrees to help him. We then see the ranger grab his hat and mask off of the wall as he tells Bell that he believes him and that he's willing to take the job, that he'll hunt down all of these people and give them the end that they deserve. He then tells Bell that he remembers that he tried to help him a long time ago and that he's never forgotten that and that he still owes him, but he's going to promise him one thing. Bell then looks up at him and asks, "Yes, what is it?" And the ranger turns to Bell and says, "When the time comes, I'll kill you last," as we reach the end of the story in this issue. On the final page of the book, we get an advertisement for the comic book series 3, which I do not recall seeing on the shelves ever, so I don't have much to say about it. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the comic book Sex Criminals. While I do very much recall seeing Sex Criminals on the shelves, I never actually picked it up and looked through it. It wasn't something that was really on my radar, so I don't have a whole lot I can say about that one either. Now, if you have any experience with either one of these comic books, feel free to talk about it in the comments below because I'd actually like to know what you thought of them. And that was East of West number 6. And in my opinion, the storytelling in this issue was nothing short of masterful. For as much as we saw happening throughout the course of this issue, none of it ever really felt confusing or disjointed or to be too much. We saw Bell Solomon expelled from the ranks of the Chosen, while Chamberlain managed to prevent his own cover from being blown so that the rest of the Chosen don't realize he's actively trying to work against them. We also get some backstory into Bell Solomon's past, as well as some very important lore in terms of the past events that happened in the Texas Republic and what led to the current Texas Republic government, as well as the backstory and introduction of this brand new character, the unnamed Texas Ranger. And I think it's all done beautifully. The writing is terrific. The visual storytelling with the artwork makes perfect sense. This is all just, in my opinion, a masterclass of how to present an incredibly well-written, well-drawn, and well-executed comic book with a very complex story that plays into a greater narrative. Of course, these are just my opinions. You may disagree with all of it. You may think that we didn't get enough backstory about the Ranger, or that we didn't learn enough about Bell's past or the Texas Republic. You might also feel that perhaps Chamberlain's cover should have been blown, given that it did seem rather odd that he was actively trying to deny all of the accusations made by Ezra, and then suddenly was like, "Oh no, Bell was actually the traitor the whole time. He came directly to me and tried to get me in on his plot." And nobody else seemed to question that. That seems kind of odd. But if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.